Hello and welcome. We've got quite a stack of notes here today. Biographical records, articles, just a huge amount of material to get through.
A mountain of it.
It really is. And we're looking at a subject that, well, you could argue they pretty much defined what global pop superstardom even means.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking about a group formed in Stockholm back in 1972. They went on to sell an estimated 150 million records. I mean, the number is just hard to comprehend.
It's staggering. And you know what makes it even more remarkable is the specific barrier they shattered.
The language barrier.
Exactly. They were the first group from a non-English speaking country to achieve consistent, long-term chart success in places like the UK, the United States, really the entire English-speaking world.
Before them, that just didn't happen on this scale, did it?
No. You might get a one-off novelty hit, something that was a bit of a curiosity, but a decade of pure dominance. Unheard of.
So yes, we are talking about ABBA. And our mission for this discussion is to go way beyond, the greatest hits album that everyone has somewhere in their collection.
Sure.
We want to explore the biography of the four members, their rise, the incredible complexity of their recording process, which I think is often completely overlooked, and then, of course, the decline, the separation, and this just unprecedented return decades later.
It really is a story of resilience as much as it is about melody. It's about business, technology, relationships, heartbreak. It's all in there.
So let's get into it. I think the common perception is that ABBA just sort of appeared out of nowhere in 1974 with Waterloo, fully formed in those shiny costumes.
Right, like they were assembled in a lab somewhere.
Exactly. But looking at these records, that is not the case at all. These four were already established, seasoned professionals in Sweden long before they wore a single sequin together.
That's such a crucial point to start with. They were not novices who just got lucky. If we look at the four protagonists individually, they each had full careers before the group even properly solidified.
Let's start with Agnetha Fältskog.
Okay, Agnetha, born in 1950. She started out in a dance band, and she was, frankly, a bit of a prodigy. She wrote her own song, I Was So in Love, at the age of 18.
And that song, I read that it actually hit #1 in Sweden. For a teenager to write her own #1, that's a huge achievement.
It is. It went straight to the top. And she was noted by critics at the time as a very talented songwriter of Schlager-style songs.
Can you explain what Schlager is exactly?
Sure. It's a specific style of popular music in Northern and Central Europe. It's very melodic, very catchy, often sentimental, and very verse-chorus oriented. So she was already a known entity, a solo star in her own right.
Okay, so that's one. Then you have Bjorn Ulvaeus.
Bjorn, born in 1945, he was fronting a very popular folk skiffle group called the Hootenanny Singers.
The Hootenanny Singers. That name just sounds so perfectly 1960s.
It really does, and they were huge in what are called the Swedish folk parks.
What were those? Like outdoor venues?
Exactly. These were open-air venues that were basically the lifeblood of the Swedish touring circuit. I mean, it was grueling. You do 3 shows a night in different parks. And Bjorn, even then, was already writing English-language songs very early on. He was trying to break out of that local mold.
So he had international ambitions from the start.
Definitely.
And then there's Benny Andersson. Now, from what I've gathered, he was basically in the biggest band in the entire country at the time.
Oh, yeah. Benny, born in 1946, was the keyboardist for the Hepstars. And in Sweden, the Hepstars were known as the Swedish Beatles.
Wow. Okay, so that gives you an idea of their fame.
A pretty good one. They had huge domestic hits like Sunny Girl and Wedding. Benny was a bona fide pop star. And what's interesting is that the Hepstars weren't just a band, they set up their own company, Hep House.
So they were entrepreneurial right from the get-go.
Absolutely. Hep House was their version of the Beatles' Apple Corps. Benny was writing massive hits like No Response, which hit #3 in '65, and Consolation, which hit #1. He was already dealing with the whole infrastructure of fame, the money, the logistics, the publishing, before ABBA was even a thought.
So he understood the business side of it.
He had to.
And finally, Annie Frid Lyngstad, who we all know as Frida. Her background seems a bit different from the others.
It is. She was born in 1945 in Norway, actually, not Sweden. Her background was much more jazz-oriented. She was a cabaret singer.
Not Schlager or folk.
No, not at all. She had her own band, the Annie Frid Four. And her big break came when she won a national talent competition in 1967. The prize was a recording contract with EMI Sweden and a chance to perform live on national TV.
So when you put these four people together, you have a Schlager songwriter, a folk singer, a rock keyboardist, and a jazz cabaret singer.
It's an incredibly eclectic mix, isn't it?
It really explains why their sound is so hard to pin down. It has little elements of everything. And the connections between them, they all formed quite naturally in this, well, I guess a pretty small Swedish music scene.
They did. Sweden's a relatively small country, and the music industry back then was even smaller. Everyone knew everyone. Bjorn and Benny met in 1966 and started writing together almost immediately.
And their first song was for Benny's band.
That's right. Their first attempt was a song called Isn't It Easy to Say, which was recorded by the Hep Stars.
And there was a very key figure watching this collaboration develop, their future manager, Stig Anderson.
Right. Stig Anderson was the manager of the Hootenanny Singers, so he was already working with Bjorn. He saw the potential in that Bjorn and Benny partnership from day one. He famously predicted, one day the pair of you will write a song that becomes a worldwide hit.
Talk about a prediction coming true.
He nailed it. Then the romantic pairings kind of established the group dynamic we all know.
Right, the two couples.
Agnetha met Bjorn during the filming of a Swedish TV special in May 1969. They got married in July of 71, and Benny and Frida also met in 1969 during the selection process for Melodifestivalen.
Melodifestivalen, that's the Swedish qualifier for Eurovision. Right. So wait, were Benny and Frida competing against each other?
In a way, yeah. Benny had written a song called Hage Clown, Hello Clown, which actually tied for first place, but then lost on a revote. But he met Frida there. About a week later, they met again on a concert tour in southern Sweden and became a couple.
So the professional and personal lives were just completely intertwined from the very beginning.
From day one, the couples were established before the band was officially a unit.
But it wasn't smooth sailing from the start. And I found this part of the records fascinating because we all assume, genius is instantly recognized. But their first attempt at working together, it was not a smash hit.
Not at all. We're looking at the period between 1970 and 1973 now, which you could really call their struggle for identity.
What happened first?
In April 1970, the two couples went on a holiday trip to Cyprus. They started singing for fun on the beach, which turned into an improvised performance for some United Nations soldiers who were stationed there.
And that sparked something.
It did. That little spark of, hey, we actually sound pretty good together, led to the idea of a proper stage act.
And that stage act was called Festfolket.
Uh-huh.
I love the linguistic layers here.
It's a great pun, yeah. Festfolket means party people. But in Swedish pronunciation, it also sounds very similar to engaged couples.
So they launched this cabaret act in late 1970 in Gothenburg. And how did the critics react?
It was a flop, a complete flop. The reviews were overwhelmingly negative. They were doing comedy sketches, solo numbers. It wasn't cohesive.
So it wasn't really a band, it was more like a variety show.
Exactly. And the only thing the critics seemed to like was the one song where all four of them sang together, a song called Hej Gammelman, which means, hello, old man.
So the critics basically said, the comedy's bad, the solo stuff is fine, but that singing together part?
Yeah.
There's something there.
That's pretty much it. The feedback was, the singing is good, the rest is bad. And it's amazing they almost stopped right there. They were discouraged enough to just shelve the whole quartet idea for a while.
But that one song, Hey, Gambling Man, it became a hit.
It did. It was the first hit to feature all four members on the recording, even though it was technically credited just to Bjorn and Benny. But it showed them that the vocal combination really worked.
Then in 1972, they tried again with a song called People Need Love. This was released under the incredibly catchy, not at all long name, Bjorn and Benny, Agnetha and Annie Fred.
A complete marketing nightmare of a name.
I can't imagine that fitting on a 45 record label.
Barely. People Need Love is an interesting song, though. It included a sort of yodeling style in the vocal arrangement, and it actually charted modestly in the U.S. via Playboy Records.
With the Boy Records.
Oh.
As in the magazine.
The very same. But here's the problem. Playboy Records was a small label. They just didn't have the distribution resources to meet demand if a song took off. The records suggest that this lack of distribution potentially stifled an earlier U.S. breakthrough.
And they had a different name on the U.S. release, too.
They did. They were billed as Bjorn and Benny with Svenska Flicka.
Svenska Flicka, what does that mean?
It means Swedish girl.
Oh, that's a bit diminishing to Agnetha and Frida, isn't it? Treating them like session singers.
It was, yeah. Treating them as backup rather than equal partners. But still, the song charted at 114 on the Cashbox chart. It was a start. It showed there was an appetite for their sound.
So, they clearly needed a better name than Bjorn and Benny, Agnetha and Annie Fred. This leads us to the name ABBA. It's an acronym, obviously. Agnetha, Bjorn, Benny, Annie, Fred.
Stig Anderson, their manager, just got tired of the long name. He started using the acronym ABBA in-house, just for shorthand.
But there was a conflict.
A big one. ABBA, spelled the same way, was already a very well-known fish canning company in Sweden. They made pickled herring.
I just can't imagine the legal meetings. Hello, we'd like to name our international pop group after your brand of herring.
It was resolved remarkably simply, which I think shows how different the times were. The group had to formally ask the fish factory for permission to use their name.
And they just said yes.
They did, but they gave one stipulation. The factory agreed, provided the band didn't do anything to make the company feel ashamed.
No pressure.
Yeah.
Just don't embarrass the herring. That's amazing. And then there's the logo, the famous mirrored bee.
That was a complete happy accident. During a photo shoot with a photographer named Wolfgang Bubi Heilemann, the members were holding up these giant letters for their names. Benny held his B upside down and backwards by mistake.
And they just liked how it looked?
It loved it. The mirrored effect, the symmetry of it, they kept it. And it became one of the most recognizable logos in the history of music.
So, moving into 1974, we reached the breakthrough, the Eurovision Song Contest. This is often framed as their official start, but they had actually tried to get into Eurovision before that, hadn't they?
They had. They had a failed attempt in 1973 with the song Ring Ring. They finished third in the Swedish selection.
But Ring Ring is a great song.
It is, and it's an important song because they had Neil Sedaka and his writing partner Phil Cody write the English lyrics. They were already aiming for that international sound. And even though it didn't make it to Eurovision, the single was a decent hit in parts of Europe and even South Africa.
But 1974 was the year. Waterloo.
They won the contest, which was held in Brighton in the UK. And it was just a watershed moment. The performance was electric. The conductor, Sven Olof Waldorf, was dressed as Napoleon. It was glam rock meets Schlager. It was unlike anything else in the competition.
And the celebration afterwards sounds legendary.
Oh, they partied in the Napoleon suite of the Grand Brighton Hotel. It was a massive, massive moment for them. But, and this is crucial to understand, winning Eurovision was a bit of a double-edged sword.
How so? I mean, you would think winning the biggest music contest in the world would be purely a good thing.
It gave them huge exposure, yes. But in the mid-70s, the serious music markets, especially the UK, viewed Eurovision as somewhat kitschy or disposable.
A bit cheesy.
A bit cheesy, exactly. It stigmatized them as a Eurovision act.
Yeah.
There was this prejudice that if you came from Eurovision, you were, by definition, a one-hit wonder.
And that really led to a slump for them, didn't it? I see here in the notes that their first European tour after that win was actually very difficult.
It was a huge reality check. They played dates in Denmark, West Germany, Austria. Most of the venues didn't sell out. They actually had to cancel their only scheduled concert in Switzerland due to poor ticket sales.
So they're Eurovision champions, but they can't sell out a theater in Switzerland.
Precisely. And UK radio completely snubbed their follow-up singles. Songs like So Long and I Do, I Do, I Do, I Do, I Do just didn't get the airplay.
I Do, I Do, I Do, I Do is incredibly catchy, though. It just feels like a hit song.
It was a #1 hit in South Africa and Australia, but the UK press and radio were just ready to write them off. There was a genuine fear within their camp that they were going to be forgotten, that they were just another Eurovision flash in the pan.
So what turned the tide? What brought them back?
The turning point was SOS in 1975. That song was different. It had a darker, more mature edge. It hit #6 in the UK, and then Mamma Mia followed it and went straight to #1. Those two tracks proved they had real depth as songwriters.
And there was one country that embraced them on a whole other level.
The real savior, strangely enough, was Australia.
Australia mania. I've read about this, and the scale of it just seems almost unbelievable.
It was total saturation. Their music videos, which they were making very early on, were aired on an Australian TV show called Countdown, and this just triggered immense, explosive popularity.
He just dominated the charts.
Completely. They stayed at #1 in Australia for months on end. I Do, I Do, I Do, I Do, I Do was #1 for 3 weeks. Then SOS for weeks. Then Mamma Mia was #1 for 10 weeks straight. Their album held the #1 spot for months.
So it was this massive success in Australia that really validated them as global stars, not just as European contest winners.
Exactly. It proved the music could translate globally on a massive scale. It gave them the confidence and the leverage they needed.
This moves us into what you'd call the golden era, roughly 1976 to 1980. This is when the hits just kept coming one after another.
This is the period of the Greatest Hits album and then the Arrival album, released in '76. Arrival is just a pop masterpiece from start to finish.
And it gave us Fernando.
Fernando, which spent 14 weeks at #1 in Australia. 14 weeks. That's a record that was held for 40 years.
Incredible. And then Dancing Queen.
Dancing Queen is their signature track in so many ways. It was their only U.S. Billboard Hot 100 #1 hit. It topped charts absolutely everywhere. It just solidified their sound, that perfect mix of pure joy with an underlying hint of melancholy.
It's a happy song about being sad.
That's a great way to put it.
Let's talk about the 1977 tour. This is where the scale of their fame becomes physically visible, in terms of the crowds they were drawing.
They played the Royal Albert Hall in London, which is incredibly prestigious. There was such demand they could have sold it out hundreds of times over. But the Australian leg of the tour was just chaotic.
How big were the crowds?
They played 260,000 attendees in total across the country. There was a famous concert in Sydney at the Myer Music Bowl that was completely rain-soaked, a total downpour. The stage is slippery, the crowd was drenched, but absolutely nobody left.
And the media frenzy around that tour was compared to Beatlemania.
It was, but it was also incredibly invasive and often quite sexist. Agnetha, in particular, was often the focus of the media's gaze. A newspaper ran the headline, "Agnetha's Bottom Tops Dull Show," referring to her white jumpsuit.
That's just incredibly rude, to put it mildly.
It is. It really highlights the intense, objectifying scrutiny they were under. Agnetha's response was quite witty, though. She famously asked, "Don't they have bottoms in Australia?" But you can see how that kind of constant attention would wear you down over time.
Speaking of the jumpsuits and the costumes, there's a fascinating financial reason behind their outrageous style. I would just assume it was 70s fashion, but there was a tax incentive involved.
This is a detail that often surprises people. Yes, the group's outrageous costumes, the sequins, the capes, the platform boots, were partly due to Swedish tax laws. The cost of the clothes was deductible, but only if the clothes could not be worn for daily use.
So the more ridiculous the outfit, the more likely you could write it off on your taxes.
Precisely. If you could conceivably wear it to the grocery store, you couldn't deduct it. So they made absolutely sure they couldn't wear it to the grocery store. It's a great example of how pragmatic and business savvy they were.
And in the early days, Frida was making them.
It's also worth noting, that some of the very early costumes were hand-sewn by Frida herself.
That adds such a personal touch to that whole iconic image. Now, I want to pivot a bit and discuss their artistry and production. We've talked about the fame, but the actual sound of ABBA is so specific, it's often called the wall of sound.
And for that, we have to credit their audio engineer, Michael B. Tretto. He was instrumental, their George Martin, if you will. He and the band developed this technique of overdubbing multiple vocal and instrumental tracks.
So they would just layer everything.
Again and again, they would record the same melody or harmony line over and over and layer them to create this massive shimmering soundscape.
It's like Phil Spector, but cleaner, maybe.
That's the perfect comparison. Spector's wall of sound was famously muddy and roaring. ABA's was crystalline and clear. They also used a technique called varispeed. They would speed up the tape slightly when recording instruments, like pianos or guitars.
And what effect did that have?
When you played it back at normal speed, the instrument sounded tighter and had a slightly different, brighter harmonic quality. It made the piano sparkle, the guitars sharper.
And they were perfectionists in the studio.
Absolute perfectionists. They would spend days just mixing a single song. Bjorn and Benny wrote the music, but the women were essential to how the final product sounded.
How did that songwriting dynamic work between the four of them?
Generally, Bjorn and Benny would write the core music and melody. Bjorn would then write the lyrics. However, Agnetha and Frida had the final say on how the lyrics were shaped during the vocal tuning and recording.
So they would adjust the phrasing.
Exactly. They would adjust phrasing to ensure it sounded right, not just emotionally, but phonetically. Because English wasn't their first language, they focused heavily on the sound of the words themselves. Sometimes the phonetic quality of a word was more important than the strict grammatical sense.
That's why their lyrics can sometimes feel a little bit idiosyncratic, but they just stick in your head.
Right. Chiquitita, you and I know. The vowel sounds are so open and resonant. They treated the human voice as just another instrument in that wall of sound.
We should probably also touch on the political context. ABBA was never known as a political band.
No, they generally avoided politics. They were very clear that they wanted to be entertainers. However, the world didn't always avoid using them for political purposes.
I remember reading John McCain use their music in 2008.
He did. And the Danish People's Party used their music in 2010. And more recently, in 2024, the Trump campaign used their music and video footage in a promotional video.
And the band responded to that one quite forcefully.
They did. They issued a statement demanding the campaign stop using their music and video immediately. They are, and always have been, very protective of their brand and how it's used.
But looking back at their own work, there were some political undertones later on, weren't there?
Yes. On the album The Visitors, the title track, The Visitors, is widely interpreted as referring to secret meetings of dissidents in Soviet-dominated states. The fear of the knock on the door.
That's a surprisingly heavy topic for a pop group.
It reflects the era. The Cold War was getting very chilly again in the early 80s, and Sweden is geographically very close to the Soviet Union. They were aware of the tension in the air.
Now we come to the more difficult part of their history, the relationships, the divorces, and the decline. This is where the personal lives began to publicly fracture the group dynamic.
It started with the first divorce. Bjorn and Agnetha announced their divorce in January 1979. They tried very hard to keep it professional, but it inevitably impacted the music. The most famous example of this is The Winner Takes It All, which came out in 1980.
People always assume that song is a direct, literal transcript of their breakup. It just feels so raw and personal.
It's complex. Bjorn wrote the lyrics, and then Agnetha had to sing them. Just think about that dynamic for a moment, singing your ex-husband's lyrics about your own divorce. It's an incredibly emotional performance.
But she has said it wasn't exactly what happened.
Right. Agnetha has stated in records that she was not the loser in the actual divorce, despite the song's lyrics. She said there were no winners or losers. But as a piece of art, it's a powerful dramatization of their situation.
And then the second divorce followed not long after.
Benny and Frida announced their divorce in February 1981, and then Benny remarried in November of that same year.
That's a very fast turnaround. That must have been incredibly difficult for Frida.
One can only assume so. And you can hear that shift in the music. If you listen to the albums Super Trooper from 1980 and then The Visitors from 1981, the tone is completely different.
How so?
The lyrics became more personal, much darker. They were dealing with separation, with aging, with those Cold War fears we mentioned. The joy of Dancing Queen was replaced by a much more reflective, almost icy sound.
The synthesizers became more prominent, too.
Yes, they did. A song like Lay All Your Love on Me topped the Billboard Hot Dance Club Play chart in the U.S. It showed they could adapt to the emerging club scene even as their themes were maturing.
And commercially, what was happening?
There was a decline in some markets. They were still topping charts in the UK and Germany, but the absolute mania was fading, and the North American struggle continued. Their biggest album there, The Album, only peaked at number 14.
They never quite had the same album sales dominance in the U.S. as they did in Europe or Australia. Why do you think that was?
Well, the U.S. market is huge and it's fragmented. Some critics felt their promotional campaigns were sloppy, but also rock music was still very dominant on the U.S. FM radio landscape. ABBA was often seen as easy listening or disco, and there was a pretty big disco backlash in the U.S. around that time.
And then, the end. But it wasn't a dramatic explosion, was it? No throwing chairs or public arguments?
No, nothing like that. The 1982 recording sessions were apparently a struggle. The energy was gone. They had some unfinished tracks. Their final performance together was on December 11th, 1982, via a live link on a British TV show called The Late Late Breakfast Show.
And then they just stopped.
And then silence. There was never an official announcement of a breakup. They simply drifted apart into solo projects. They sold their shares in their record company, Polar Music, in 1983, and that was that.
That drifting apart lasted for decades. Let's look at this long hiatus and the eventual improbable revival. What did they do immediately after 1982?
Benny and Bjorn continued working together almost immediately. They wrote the musical Chess with lyricist Tim Rice, which produced big hits like One Night in Bangkok. It showed their ambition to move beyond pop music and into musical theater.
And the women?
Agnetha and Frida both pursued solo albums with varying degrees of success. Agnetha, over time, eventually retreated almost completely from public life, which only added to the mystique and the legend.
But in the 1990s, something really interesting happened. ABBA became cool again.
There was a massive resurgence. In 1992, the British synth-pop duo Erasure released an EP called ABBA-esque. It was a tribute, but it was done with such clear love and respect for the songs.
And other musicians started showing their appreciation.
That same year, U2, at the time, probably the biggest rock band in the world, invited Bjorn and Benny on stage with them in Stockholm during their Zoo TV tour. It was a huge signal to the rock world that it was okay to like ABBA. It gave them credibility.
And Australian cinema played a huge role again, doesn't
A
it?
huge role. 2 films in 1994, The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and Muriel's Wedding, repopularized their music for a whole new generation. Muriel's Wedding in particular used the music as a central plot point. It framed the songs not as a guilty pleasure, but as genuine emotional sustenance.
And we absolutely cannot forget the compilation album ABBA Gold.
Yeah. Released in 1992, ABB Gold became one of the best-selling albums worldwide, ever. It has spent over 1,000 weeks on the UK Top 100 Albums chart. That's almost 20 years. It just kept their music constantly in the public consciousness.
Duncan the musical.
Mamma Mia, the stage musical in 1999, and then the film in 2008. The film became the highest-grossing film in the UK that year. It was a phenomenon.
With all this renewed success, the offers for a reunion must have been just astronomical.
They were. In the year 2000, it was widely reported that they turned down an offer of $1 billion for a reunion tour.
$1 billion.
$1 billion. They were adamant about not ruining the legacy. They didn't want it to be an oldies act, trying to recapture the past on stage.
Which makes what happened next even more surprising. After refusing for so long, they finally came back together.
It began very slowly. They started making public appearances together again in 2016 for the opening of a dinner show experience called Mamma Mia, The Party. Then, promoter Simon Fuller announced he was working with them on a digital entertainment experience.
And then came the announcement about new music.
In April 2018, they announced they had gone back into the studio and recorded 2 new songs.
But there were long delays after that.
The technical complexity of what they were planning, and then, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic pushed everything back. But finally, in September 2021, they made the massive announcement, a brand new album called Voyage, and a concert residency to go with it.
Voyage was their first album in 40 years. That's a lifetime in the music industry.
And it was incredibly well received. It got strong critical praise and had massive sales. The lead singles, I Still Have Faith in You and Don't Shut Me Down, proved they still had that classic sound.
And they got their first Grammy nomination.
It's unbelievable. In 2021, after all those years, they received their first ever Grammy nomination for Record of the Year. And it's ironic that their comeback album charted higher in the US, it reached number 2, than any of their classic 70s albums ever did.
And the concert residency, ABBA Voyage, is something entirely new. It's not just a hologram show, is it?
No, it's much, much more advanced than that. They partnered with Industrial Light and Magic George Lucas's visual effects company. They built a custom 3,000 capacity arena in London just for the show.
And the members themselves performed for it.
They did. All 4 of them in their 70s wore motion capture suits and performed the entire concert set for weeks to capture every movement, every mannerism, every glance.
So when you go to the show and see the avatars on stage, you're actually seeing the 70-year-old members' current movements translated onto digital versions of their younger selves.
Exactly. It effectively solves the problem of aging in pop music. It freezes them in time at the height of their powers around 1979, but with the wisdom and nuance of their modern-day performance.
It allows them to tour without ever leaving home.
They can be on stage in London every single night while sleeping in their own beds in Stockholm. It's a fascinating precedent for the future of legacy acts.
And the recognition of their overall impact continues. In March of 2024, all 4 members received a major honor from the King in Sweden.
They did. They were appointed Commander First Class of the Royal Order of Vasa.
Which is a huge deal, I gather.
It's a very big deal. It's significant because it was the first time in almost 50 years that such an honor was bestowed on Swedes, and especially for their contribution to music. It acknowledges them not just as entertainers, but as cultural ambassadors who really put Sweden on the global map.
Before we wrap up, we have to touch on some of the obscure facts and collectibles that are in our stack here. There's some rare recordings that diehard collectors go absolutely crazy for.
There is one holy grail. It's a record called Hova's Vitne.
What's the story behind that?
It was a tribute song written for their manager Stig Anderson's 50th birthday in 1981. It's a fun, silly song. They only pressed 200 copies on red vinyl to give to the guests at his birthday party.
So if you find one of those at a garage sale,
buy it immediately. It's worth a fortune.
and there's a Japanese commercial jingle?
Yes, the national song. It was a commercial jingle for the brand National, which was owned by Matsushita in Japan and Australia. They re-recorded the entire backing track of Fernando, but with completely different lyrics promoting the electronics brand.
So instead of "There was something in the air that night."
There is so much more to National. It shows how commercial they were willing to be. They weren't precious about the music in that sense. They understood it was a business.
And finally, the great unreleased track that fans are still waiting for.
Just like that. It's a track they worked on during those difficult 1982 sessions. It was left unreleased in its entirety. Parts of the melody were recycled and used in the musical chess, but the full ABBA version has never been officially released.
Why not? The demand is huge.
Benny and Bjorn are perfectionists. They feel the song isn't finished or that it just doesn't meet their standards, so it remains the one that got away for the fans.
So if we look at the whole picture here, they went from a dispute with a fish canning factory to what is essentially a knighthood. They survived the death of disco, the rise of punk, the digital age, everything.
They are the best-selling Swedish band of all time by a massive margin. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2010, but I think more than that, they managed to keep their dignity intact.
That's a good point.
They didn't burn out in a public scandal. They just quietly faded away and then completely reinvented the medium of live performance itself with Voyage.
It really is a testament to the quality of the songwriting. Trends change, fashions change, but a perfectly constructed melody is permanent.
That's the key to all of it. They treated pop music with the seriousness of classical composition. That wall of sound, the intricate harmonies, the melancholic lyrics hidden inside these upbeat dance tracks. That's why we're still talking about them all these years later.
And it's why they could sell 150 million records.
And why they could turn down $1 billion. They knew their own worth.
Indeed. Well, this has been a fascinating journey through the archives. From the folk parks of Sweden to a digital arena in London. We hope you enjoyed this exploration of ABBA, and there's always more to discover in the liner notes.
Always.
Thanks for listening.